meeting to order. We have roll call, please.
Mr. Jim Bard.
Jim Bard here.
Mrs. Erica Berg.
Erica Berg here.
Mr. Dwayne Burt.
Dwayne Burt here.
Dr. Nathan Goetz.
Nathan Goetz here.
Dr. Michael Lyman.
Michael Lyman here.
Mr. Fred Scott.
Fred Scott here.
Dr. Gino Torrey. Mr. Charlie Suiters.
Charlie Suiters here.
Mr. Mark Butterball.
Okay, and pledge allegiance to the flag.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As we begin our deliberations this evening, let us once again be reminded of our duty to represent all of the children of this school community, regardless of age, sex, race, or creed, and regardless of need or ability. This meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the district's YouTube channel. May we now have a moment of silence to reflect on our thoughts, plans, and actions on behalf of the students in the Shippensburg Area School District.
Have a motion to approve your agenda.
Fred Scott, I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Dwayne Burt, second.
Roll call.
Mr. Jim Bard.
Yes.
Mrs. Erica Berg.
Erica Berg, yes.
Mr. Dwayne Burt.
Dwayne Burt, yes.
Dr. Nathan Goetz.
Nathan Goetz, yes.
Dr. Michael Lyman.
Yes.
Mr. Fred Scott.
Fred Scott, yes.
Mr. Charlie Suiters.
Charlie Suiters here.
Motion carried unanimously.
Okay, we're going into citizen comment. Come to the mic, name, address, and welcome your.
Are there any citizen comments regarding agenda items? Mr. Vice President, seeing none, if we could move on to the consent agenda.
Okay. Everybody get right into personnel?
Yes, sir. And if I could take a moment to read these.
Yes.
Under Personnel 3A, Professional Staff, Administration recommends approval of the following new appointments. Amy Boyer, librarian at the Shippensburg Area Middle School, effective date to be determined, dependent on her release from her current school district, at a status quo salary, which will be prorated for the 21-22 contract year of $74,486 on the Master's 45, Step 9. She is replacing Cassandra Chappelle, who is transferring, who is currently in that position. Mrs. Boyer earned her bachelor's degree in English secondary education in May 1999 from Grove City College, and her master's degree in school library and information technology in December 2009 from Mansfield University. In addition to Pennsylvania certification in English grades 7 and 12, or 7 through 12, and library science grades kindergarten through 12, Mrs. Boyer also holds a program specialist certification in English as a second language. Mrs. Boyer comes to the district with over 21 years of public education experience, most recently serving as a high school English as a second language teacher within the Chambersburg Area School District. The district is also recommending Kirsten Shields as a kindergarten teacher at the Nancy Grayson Elementary School, effective November 2nd, at a status quo salary, which will be prorated for the 21-22 school year, of $50,769, bachelor's step 1, replacing Kathy Wolf, who is transferring to another position. Ms. Shields earned her bachelor's degree in early childhood education in December 2020 from St. Francis University. She holds a Pennsylvania certification in grades pre-kindergarten through 4 and was previously a co-teacher at the St. Paul Children's Center. Currently, Ms. Shields is the Shippensburg University's Head Start and Pre-K Counts Program lead and has served in that role for the past 3 years. Under support staff, administration recommends approval of the following individuals for substituting: Erica Cow, health room assistant, classroom assistant, and secretarial, effective retroactive to October 15th, 2021.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Dwayne Burt moved to approve items 3A, 1, 2, and 3.
Fred Scott, second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Mrs. Erica Berg,
Yes.
Mr. Dwayne Burt,
Dwayne Burt, yes.
Dr. Nathan Goetz,
Yes.
Dr. Michael Lyman,
Yes.
Mr. Fred Scott,
Fred Scott, yes.
Mr. Jim Bard, Mr. Charlie Suiters.
Yes.
Motion carried unanimously.
Board members, under the action agenda, we have one item, 4A, Contracted Services for Human Resources Department. Administration recommends approval of Nicole Weber to provide HR management services to the school district Human Resources Department as requested, effective retroactive to October 12, 2021, and continuing through November 24, 2021. The hourly rate for such temporary contracted services is $50.
Dwayne Burt move approval of item 4A, yes, 4A.
Do you have a second?
Fred Scott, second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Dwayne Burt,
Dwayne Burt, yes.
Dr. Nathan Goetz,
Yes.
Dr. Michael Lyman,
Yes.
Mr. Fred Scott,
Fred Scott, yes.
Mr. Jim Bard, Mrs. Erica Berg,
Yes.
Mr. Charlie Suiters.
Yes.
Motion carried unanimously.
Mr. Vice President, if we could now move to the discussion agenda. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to review feasibility study updates. And just to give a little bit of background on the feasibility study, of course, the district engaged with Reynolds approximately 2.5 years ago to undergo a district-wide feasibility study. That feasibility study is very detailed in that it looks at not only the educational programming for the school district currently, but what our vision is for educational programming as we move forward over the next 10 to 20 years. In addition, what the feasibility study does is it looks at all of the buildings and the building envelope and the subsystems, electrical, plumbing, mechanical systems, to determine what status our current facilities and those subsystems are in, and what systems need attention given their expected life. So that feasibility study was started prior to my coming on to the district, and in that interim period, there was discussion about how the study itself was presented, and possibly there might be a better way to look at that information. And additionally, when I came on board as superintendent of the schools, it was very difficult for me as someone new to the school district to have a good understanding of what was done with the feasibility study and the status of our buildings. So at that time, we determined to sort of reinvigorate that feasibility study process and use site logic. So since that time, we've been working with site logic in reevaluating the district buildings and those subsystems which I mentioned, and of course in great detail. That of course combined with the pandemic and a number of items that have sort of maybe slowed that process somewhat. It is also a very lengthy process. Feasibility studies do take multiple years to conduct. We're at the point, however, where we're looking for specific recommendations, not only as administration, but also as a board, as you well know, over the last few months, where we've been talking in more detail about the projects that we would undertake and how those projects might affect the next 20 years for Shippensburg area school district. So these matters are not something that should be taken lightly and certainly require the detailed study that Site Logic has undergone, but also a detailed look from a board member and administrative perspective. Tonight, we'd like to continue that process by honing in and focusing specifically on the middle school, as there are many projects that need done throughout the school district, many projects that need done in an individual building. We felt it might best be to look at one single building tonight and talk specifically about some areas that we might move forward on in the very near future. And so tonight, we're going to be looking at the projects that were proposed for the building, as the middle school building, as part of the feasibility study. Again, giving good consideration for where we want to head, in addition to financing. One of the things that we've spoken about in the recent past is the financing that the district would be required to undergo in order to be able to support projects not only at the middle school, but in other school buildings as well. Part of that process is looking at how much the district can actually borrow. And so balancing what we can borrow and prioritizing those needs throughout the district is a tremendous task, and one that we are hopeful to continue embarking on tonight. Tonight, specifically at the middle school, we'll make a recommendation or recommending that the Board of Directors seriously consider 3 specific projects, larger projects, and there are some smaller projects that will be a part of this process that Mr. Walker will enlighten us on. But more specifically, looking at the expansion of the middle school cafeteria, which we've been discussing, looking at expanding classroom space or expanding an expansion of classrooms at the middle school, in addition to consideration for revising the parent pickup loop at the middle school. There are many other projects that need done, and certainly some other larger projects that we feel we will want to consider as we move forward. But we're also looking at what are specific areas that we can hone our efforts on to begin the process of design, ultimately bidding, permitting, and beginning construction on those as soon as possible. So with that in mind, just a brief history of where we've been and where we're at today. I want to thank everyone from the board who's here this evening, as well as those in the audience. And we're going to start with Mr. Walker, who will take us through some information that you've seen before, and some of it which has been reformulated to package some of these projects into a condensed format.
Thank you everybody for coming. We thought that the first handout was the project. I don't know how high this mic is. The project that we talked about in July is the first handout, and if you look at the total numbers, the project came to right at $20 million for the middle school project. And when Dr. Suppo and I met after we presented this in July, we had talked about the financing and what we can borrow, what we can use ESSER's money for. And we decided to talk about paring this phase of the presentation down to a more manageable number, that we could use some ESSER's money, we could borrow money on, and not put the district in, right term, Dr. Suppo, financial obligation or
Yeah, the goal all along as we've looked at the feasibility study and the projects that we're proposing are being proposed. And again, some of those are based on the life of products. For example, a boiler in a school. It only has a life of so long. And so you know sooner or later, you're going to have to replace that boiler, as one example. And so currently, the district has debt service. And what debt service is the amount of money that is part of the budget process that the district has to pay each year to pay back its debt. And this is something that all districts have. Fortunately, Shippensburg Area School District is in a really good place. And what I mean by that is that our debt service that we currently have is falling off. We're getting to the end of the time period where the debt that we owe back is getting smaller, significantly smaller every year. And so as we look at the projects, we look at how much debt service we can have without adding to the budget. So the goal has been, without adding additional debt service to our current budget, what can we afford to do as a school district? And so these projects, or not just these projects, but overall, that number, rough numbers, somewhere around $50 million. In addition to that, we have allocated approximately $4.3 million of ESSER funding that can be used for construction projects that meet specific criteria. The middle school really has two projects that fit very well with that money and how it can be spent. The expansion of the cafeteria and the new classroom space that we're requesting. So that's just kind of a little bit of background on financing, but Joe, go ahead and pick up from there.
Right. So when we did, and it's the second handout that's part of your packet, we pared that down and did the three areas that we just talked about. We did the cafeteria expansion. Right now, the cafeteria can fit about 280 kids in there, give or take, at one time. That means that the middle school, 800 students, give or take, Dr. Suffolk. So we're running approximately 4 lunches out of the middle school cafeteria that was actually built in 54. I think somewhere around that ballpark. It was opened in 1954. It is still the same size. So we're recommending that we make the cafeteria and the kitchen expansion, the area will about double in size to handle the increased student load. And the other part of that, to do that project concurrently, would be the 6 classroom addition on the south side of the building. That's what, Fruit Market Way now? I think that's what that called, Old Road. To put that expansion on the south side of the intermediate school and do the parent pickup loop that will come around that south side of the building, basically triple the size of the parent pickup area, front parking lot, and make that 2 ways to get rid of a lot of that traffic down at the corner of Park and Everly. So those are the 3 major scopes that we're looking at to get started with first. And we had talked extensively, Dr. Suppo and I, and we think that if we do the 8 classrooms and the cafeteria expansion at the same time, the cost of labor will decrease because we'll have the construction companies on site. They won't have to remobilize. Do you want me to bring that one up? There are the expansions in the sea blue, powder blue, I guess you would talk about. The 6 classrooms at the top of the screen and the kitchen cafeteria expansion there at the bottom of the screen in the blue. And then the parent loop will come in up here at the top off of Everly Drive between the maintenance barn and the south side of the building.
Also want to point out through working with Site Logic, there is a grant that is available through Penndot. And
Yes,
so
there's
Site Logic
PennDOT
has helped
and-
other districts through that grant process. So they're very interested in applying for those grant funds for that loop expansion. And of course, there's no guarantee, but we're hopeful that the district will be successful in obtaining some additional funds to help support that project.
Do we have a sense of how much those funds would be?
Yes. If you look on the second set of that, Dr. Goetz, the total project for everything that we're talking about tonight is 14.2, 14.3, which you take the 4.3 out of the ESSER's funds for the classroom addition, that gets us a little bit under that $10 million mark. And I think Christie has mentioned that several times when we've talked about this, that's what, and Christie, you'll have to enlighten me on that, bond financing said to do that in increments.
Correct. If you stay under 10 million, you can look at either like the bond market or a bank qualified loan. Right now, the bank qualified loans have been a better rate. So if you keep that under the 10 million, you can do the bank qualified.
Yeah,
Dwayne Burke, just to elaborate on that a minute, we just this year, as you know, refinanced the existing debt for the Career Center for the modernization project that was undertaken there a few years ago. And because the project was under 10 million, we were able to get bank financing at an extremely low rate. Thank you.
and that's, Mr. Bird just getting ready to say, it's one of the things that Dr. Suppo and I spoke about the last previous meetings we've had on this. That's something that we have to be cognizant of, because reading the papers and on the news is the interest rates going to start to go up.
So I was just going to ask about the PennDOT grants. Are we talking like a few $100,000, or are we talking about millions of dollars? Or do we not
You
know?
never know till you have to apply for them. There's actually two grants. One's a PennDOT grant, and there's another one that Site Logic has had better luck with getting for blacktop sidewalks, those kind of additions. The name escapes me at the moment, but they've had better luck getting that grant. And they said that it could be anywhere from $100,000 to whatever the project. They've seen pieces of projects be funded, and they've seen the entire project being funded.
All right, so we're looking at 2.4 million for all of the
Yes,
potential, like, qualifying projects.
Correct.
It could be anywhere from 0 to 2.4 million.
right. I know that's not,
Yeah, no, that's
you
what
know,
I needed to know.
it's grants, and
Sure.
the second one I spoke of, and I can get the name for everybody the next time, they said that one needs to be applied for in July. The PennDOT grants are November. Obviously, to apply for a PennDOT grant now is a little bit late, so it would have to be next November. But the other grant that they're looking to apply for, they can apply for this coming July.
And the way these grants work, if we've already started construction, are we still able to qualify, or do we have to wait until?
No, those grants are independent of any of the building construction that we want to do. They're strictly for driveways, entrances into school districts, parks, those kind of things, to help alleviate traffic and the infrastructure.
And so the contractors that would be doing all the work on the building would be different than the contractors who would be working on, like, the parking lot and?
No, they would, yeah. The contractors could be doing the site work on the building additions, the footers, that kind of thing, the excavating. They could be the same people that are going to do the excavating for the parking lots and the driveways, but they're two independent
Well,
entities.
I guess what I'm asking is, best case scenario, I assume that we're starting to do construction in this coming summer.
Best case scenario,
Yeah, right. I mean, best case scenario.
right.
So I guess since we can't apply for these grants until summertime, like if we've already started the work, does that make us ineligible for the grants or?
No, it's, from what we've been explained and what I've read, the grants are, spend your money, you get the work done, then you apply to whatever they're gonna reimburse you
okay.
for. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
reimbursable grant.
All right.
Right.
Okay, great, thanks.
So just to step back for a minute, to highlight what we have here this evening, 10,000 foot level, is the first colored packet, which Mr. Walker has provided everyone. If you look on the second page, it shows that $19 million and some change. And so that is complete review of the feasibility study, prioritizing items into that column 2A, which we've talked about previously. That's the cost for everything. Now, the second packet, what that does is that looks at and says, all right, what can we start on immediately? Because one of the discussions, which I think was a very good point the last time we met, was that if you look at all of the projects throughout the district, they exceed what our borrowing power is, that $50 million that I had mentioned earlier. So at some point, we're going to have to prioritize items or delay items, things of that nature. There certainly are some projects that we can undertake within the district without using, construction management firm. But within that, what we've done is we've said, all right, if the district was to borrow $10 million, specifically for the middle school, and on top of that, the $4.3 million of ESSER funds, that gives you $14.3 million. What projects would we prioritize to do with that $14.3 million? So that second set of itemized lists that Mr. Walker has provided us, that shows us what is and what isn't part of that. If you look on the back page, you'll see near the bottom where there are items listed for suggested deferment or optional work. That does not mean that the district would not undergo those items and that they're not important. It simply means that to move forward with some of those priority items, again, what do we feel those priority items are? Cafeteria, additional classroom space, and the parent loop project, which we could move forward with relatively quickly. The idea behind that is the ESSER funds, the $4.3 million, that does need to be spent by October of '23. So if you look at the timeline of starting now, engaging with your architects, your engineers, and your construction company, of course, there's the design work that needs to occur for all of that, in addition to, once the design concept is complete, bidding the project, obtaining permits. So all of that certainly takes more time on to what we already know has been a very rigorous study or rigorous feasibility study, which has certainly taken time and normally so throughout the school district. But our goal is to sort of look at what we can start and agree on right now as, yes, let's go. And these other projects be something that we continue to look at, not forget about, but continue to look at as we look at the whole or entire district.
Right. Future work, correct. Future work.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
I just want to clarify, the bus route, parent drop-off loop, even though we're calling this a middle school project, it's for the whole sort of high school, middle school complex.
Eventually, it will all tie together. At this particular time, it is just to try to alleviate the congestion down at the corner of Park and Everly.
So So then it's not all the yellow roads on your
No, that,
map.
it will eventually tie everything together, but at this time, it is just the parent loop, at the high school. So I think the entire project to do middle school, high school, additional parking, that was somewhere, if I remember right, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4 million.
Okay, so when we see on your second colorful Excel handout thing where it says bus loop improvements at middle school and high school, so it's really just the yellow roads in the middle school property, not any of the stuff in the high school.
That is correct.
That is
In fact,
correct.
we should
Correct.
actually remove that. We've just been talking about it as a high school, middle school campus, but for purposes of our conversation this evening, it really is just that middle school piece.
Okay.
Yeah, it's everything on, that'd be the east side of Everly Drive, middle school side of Everly Drive. It would include the yellow part of what's on the middle school property off of Everly Drive.
Okay.
Right.
And then, I'm not a plumber, and so this is why I'm asking you, Joe.
Sure.
I'm assuming that some of these, like mechanical controls and the plumbing, domestic water fixtures, and maybe electrical, some of these, will there be some efficiencies that we achieve through these upgrades and some cost savings to the districts because we're upgrading some of these sort of boring plumbing things, but that will actually save the district some money?
You'll save, money. Will you save significant money? The last renovation to the middle school was done in 1998. Motor efficiencies, those type of things have gotten better, but to the point where you're going to see a significant drop-off in electrical usage. The motors back then were pretty efficient. You will see some better efficiency. Cost per light payback is out there 15, 16 years. It's like going from what we have now in our buildings on the T8 fluorescent light, T8 fluorescent lights, and change them over to LED. Everybody thinks, well, that's a big savings, but when you go from T8s to LED, the payback of life expectancy payback is somewhere around 28 years. So that's a hard cost to justify when it's going to take you 28 years in electrical savings to pay that back. Now, you start doing little bits of everything, yes, you will see savings, but it's not going to be significant. When they did the boiler upgrade in 2011, a lot of those pumps and things they put in 2011 were pretty much state-of-the-art 10 years ago. Have they gotten more efficient today? Absolutely, but it's not significant.
Okay, so we're not replacing 1950s technology, we're replacing stuff that's been upgraded more recently
Yeah,
than that.
98 was the last upgrade for the middle
Okay.
school. So we're replacing, was that 20, 23 years
Okay,
technology?
thanks.
I would point out, because this was hit, on that last page, you'll see under suggestions for deferred or optional work, you'll see item number 2 there. Lighting option 1, provide LED tube retrofit and plug-in replacements for CFL fixtures. So that was a project. If you look at that, the cost of that, again, going back to the overall, if we did everything, soup to nuts, middle school, $19 million project, what can we hone down out of there? And so specifically, that was something we talked about, and we pulled that out because the cost of that was nearly $500,000. And when you look at what that payback is for that $500,000 on energy savings, it's just so far out there that it made sense to pull that out and
Right.
say, hey, okay, there's one way we can reduce total project cost. So that's just one example. And if you look below that, you can see there are some corresponding notes that provide some justification or ideas with those projects that we're saying. And when I say deferment, understand, I'm not necessarily saying defer 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. I'm just saying right now, what can we move forward on that's a good package, a good project, or a couple of projects that we can advance and set some dates for and see some progress here in the very near future. And I'm very happy with the progress we've made. This, the feasibility study, again, is a very in-depth, detailed process, not to mention funding and then sequencing. How would you do these projects? When we look at the parent loop, one of the reasons we looked at that as being something that we would do sooner rather than later is certainly the need. I think everyone that's been out near the middle school in the morning when kids are coming and buses are arriving, or in the afternoon when everyone's bailing out of school, they can see the need there. But furthermore, when you look at the design or the flow of construction, how that might occur in the near future, part of the process, or part of the design concept at the middle school, and Joe, if you could bring up that middle school concept again, you'll see on the very bottom of this middle school concept, and forgive me because I don't see any difference in color there, but
Well, the bottom section is purple,
So-
and it is actually this handout.
Yes.
It's part of your packet. There is a handout there.
so that bottom section shows an expansion on the end of the middle school. This is where the current parent pickup is. For those in the audience, this is a little bit hard to read. But near where the current parent pickup is an expansion of the middle school for the arts programs and a revamp of the auditorium in the middle school. So to do that construction right now, that would even wreak more havoc on our process, because if you think about the end of the day or the beginning of the day where parents are really coming by that end of the building to pick up students or drop them off, you can't have construction going on at the same time.
Right.
So the idea is, okay, fix the parent loop now so you move traffic to the other end of the building so that when you are ready to do this phase of the project, maybe call that phase 2. When you go to phase 2, then you can do that, you can have construction taking place, and it's not in the way of parent
Right.
pickup or student drop-off.
Right, not disrupting your parent pickup flow or anything, because in the final analysis of this, part coming up the entrance now to the middle school, we're probably gonna make that just as an emergency access and put a small parking lot for staff off to the right-hand side of that park place coming up to the middle school.
Another concern that rightly so, that I think board members have had is when you look at these projects, you have to also consider economy of scale. And I think that's a very valid point, because when you're doing projects and you have equipment on site, when you have contractors on site, when you're purchasing materials, certainly the more that you're doing, there's that economy of scale savings. And so when we looked at these projects, we said, okay, well, what's the cost of this if we are pulling certain things out? And you can see again below where those final notes are on the second page. You can see that really by doing the projects in this way, it doesn't really harm economy of scale, because you can bundle that with some additional projects that we're considering for the high school. So again, phase 1, looking at parent drop-off loop, cafeteria, and new classrooms. Phase 2 being if you're going to consider some of the work on the interior of the building, rest of the building, the administrative suite, in addition to that expansion in the performing arts area, that could be bundled with some other work that you're doing at the high school to really reap the benefits of that economy of scale.
And what's nice is, because of the way we put this together, if you're gonna do work at the high school, it's not like you're gonna drive from the middle school to the intermediate school. they're right across the street. Labor costs would be cut substantially, because they would be in the same area.
Excuse me, I have a question. We have ESSER's money that we need to use, correct?
Yes.
So is that what we can, are we here to discuss using the ESSER's money and then go with the bond with what you have deferred? That's my understanding?
Yes, sir.
It's a combination of both.
Well, if we don't have the bond, we gotta wait and go through the process to get the bond. We have that ESSER money available to us, correct?
But
We have ESSER's funds available to us, 4.3 we set aside, and that, what we're doing is we're combining that with a just under $10 million bond that we would also get to be able to do those
So
projects.
we're talking a different bond than what we were talking about before, the $50 million bond.
Correct.
Yes,
And you're taking
correct.
10 out of that 50 million and putting this up.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, now-
Yep.
Just under 10, so that we can target this bank financing.
Oh, okay.
Right.
When you talk about, I'm looking at the big bond, but you're just saying, taking a chunk of that bond out to add it to the serve ESSER to complete this project.
And really, in my mind, because the overall needs of the district are so comprehensive and almost mind-boggling to address all of it, this is really, in my mind, an effort, and I'll turn it back to a question, but, or you can turn it into a question, whatever's best. But if we know some of the greatest needs are at the middle school. We know space is a critical need, and we can use ESSER money for the space needs at the middle school. And if we looked at the overall priority of the district, these three projects would be right at the top of the list. They're at the top of the list for the middle school, and they would be right at the top of the list for the entire school district. So the idea is to roll this up into phase one, give us something we can get started on. It doesn't really take away from any of the rest of the effort. These are among the top things that we would spend money on immediately if we were spending money. Is that
Correct.
that's a fair assessment of the way to say it?
Well, that gets to my question too, so I think, thanks, because that sort of answers my question. But just to back up a little bit, we were at 10,000 feet, let's go to 15. So, I'm trying to remember what number we were looking at in terms of our borrowing capacity without changing our sort of operating budget expense. Was that, the
48.
number I have in my mind was like 60 to 65 million.
48,
It's closer to 50 million.
yeah, closer to 50.
Well, that's unfortunate. Okay, so 48 million. And so if I'm just kind of like doing sort of quick, kind of mental calculus, I'm just trying to make a mental model of this in my head, right? So if we've got 48 million that we can potentially access without changing our annual operating budget, we're saying let's take 10 million of that right now, combine it with the ESSER funds, and let's go forward with these things. And then I guess to Dwayne's point, I mean, earlier we said, well, we really need to look at the entire district to sort of prioritize all the projects. But if these projects are not only sort of the most important projects at the middle school, but also the most important projects in the entire district, then I guess it simplifies what is not at all simple to just start here.
That's been the focus of everything, has been little. The only other thing that sticks in my mind is the intermediate school plumbing.
Yes,
I think this past year will get to finish before it's ready.
What'd you say, Chuck? I didn't hear you.
The plumbing at the intermediate school is subpar,
yeah.
and it could
The,
cost us more later if we don't address it sooner.
Right. The domestic
I
glue,
forget what the price of that was.
I think it was just under half, was it under $500,000, Joe? Could be remembering that.
I had a price from a contractor. I had a price from a contractor come in before we even got to this point 6-8 months ago. And their price to do the entire domestic loop, which is the hot, the cold, the hot water recirc line, and the 2 domestic water heaters that we cannot get parts for any longer is about $800,000. The estimated price on the feasibility study was 2.6. So that was one of the things that we had moved off of the feasibility study when we met in July, that we could do in-house for substantially less.
So I'm looking at the old sheet that we got like a month ago or something. And
Right.
under plumbing, it says domestic hot water and recirculation replacement, and that was 762,000.
There's more,
And
That-
then there's
yeah.
domestic water piping replacement to address pinhole leaks throughout facility, and that's 715,000.
correct. So there's 1.5 million.
Yeah, so that's all one project.
That is
then.
basically all gonna be all one project, and there should be a third breakdown there about water heaters and circulating pumps.
Under
How is that-
mechanical and
Right,
controls,
under
maybe.
mechanical.
Yeah, hot water heating system improvements, that was 334. Wow, so now we're getting up to like 2 million.
Yeah, exactly,
And then we got chilled water system improvements, which is another 500,000.
right.
It's getting a little crazy. I mean, the whole thing the whole thing with all these other, with the new open protocol system throughout for whatever BAS/ATC is.
Well, we've already taken care of that.
Oh, we've already
in-house.
done that?
Yes.
And then there's something about energy recovery.
The energy recovery was part of that, but again, the payback on energy recovery is, I think, 19 and a half years. So that's one of those things that, can you save money? Yes. Are you going to see a big return on your investment
Yeah.
on that part of it? No.
Well, stepping back a step, so back to my, unfortunately, $48 million, right? That's our piggy bank here we're working with. 48 million. And if we say 10 million right now for these middle school projects, and then maybe now we're starting to talk about $1.5 million or 2 million for this intermediate school project. I mean, Dr. Suffolk, you said something about like the future projects and not wanting to push those off too far. So I guess when we're looking at those future projects, we also need to think about those as falling under that $48 million number, right? And so really, eventually there has to be a pretty, aggressive culling here because, we're just not going to be able to afford all these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we've been discussing the feasibility study, one of the things very difficult, and you just even said, Dr. Goetz, it's really everything. There's a lot of gray in there, and because you're looking at each building and drilling down to specifically what the priorities are and determining those, it's a daunting task. So this is where we felt like, okay, what's the best way to get started? How can we start something? We know we can go through this process and we can evaluate each building in great detail, but we're still going to come back to what we know needs done at the middle school with those 3 projects, and of course, in addition to the ESSER fund. So that's where, again, this is just phase 1. Phase 1, hey, what can we do right now? Get started, get approval, move forward, and then of course we'll start continuing the conversation with regard to many other needs of the district and prioritizing those.
Dwayne Burt, let me just ask a couple of questions of Mr. Wachter.
Sure.
So, and really to try to address Mr. Suter's concern as it relates to the intermediate school, which we all understand, and the critical nature of that. Dr. Goetz pointed out a more comprehensive list of the mechanical items that were on the original intermediate school list. But Mr. Wachter, you mentioned about a number, I think it was about $800,000.
Correct.
Help me get from the couple of million from the original. I'm thinking that part of that are things we maybe won't ever do, and I'm also thinking that because it wouldn't be tied to the overall project and so forth, that some of the, whatever it is, 1.5, you can get done cheaper. So explain how we got from the whole ball of wax, 2.5 million, that Dr. Goetz referred to, down to 800,000. Just very briefly, help me understand, these we're not going to do, and this we're getting done cheaper, and whatever. And where I'm really going with this is if the 800,000 solves our real need at the intermediate school for a long period of time, and we see the need to try to keep the borrowing under $10 million to get the lower interest rate from the bank financing, is there a way, based on the way the billings could work, let's say, for example, and the timing of the project, such that we could pay for part of the 800,000 in 1 year, and the second part of it in the second year, or something like that, and pay for it in cash to keep it out of this. Thank you.
How I worked on the project at the intermediate school and how I worked on the project at the intermediate school and on the James Byrd part of the project, I went through and I did my own estimating and brought contractors in that the school district would actually write the specs, manage projects, put them out to bid, and the district would be the general contractor and the project manager. That's where you're going to save substantial amount of money if you can manage your own projects, write your own specs, put your own bid documents together.
So are you saying we turned the 2.5 million or whatever, or 2 million that was originally in the list for the mechanical needs of the intermediate school down to 800 based on what you just said?
Correct.
That's exactly what I thought you were going to say. And then so and I think that's tremendous. And we talked about this from the very beginning, and the advantages of this. And so therefore, in order to meet Mr. Suter's point that he made, which is certainly critical, then we have really now, either the decision to look at, can we do something in billing, between 2 years and look at a way of funding this out of cash, and we certainly have some cash, or do we forget about the bank thing or hold our breath and roll it together and do it together?
Well, what'll happen is, and we've worked on other projects that I've written here in the past, and the money that we have spent for the projects that the district has written the specs for and managed the project in-house came out of fund balance. They did not come out of bond financing. They didn't come out of a loan. They actually came out of district fund balance.
And that's exactly what I'm suggesting, although it might really sting in 1 year. If the timing of it could be that we would put a down payment on, in 1 year, and then make progress payments and finish paying in the second year, that really might could work.
Yeah, the only drawback we're going to have with that one is the piping at the intermediate school, because all the piping comes out of the mechanical room and it runs in a rack the whole way around the building. So if you're going to replace 3 sets of domestic water piping, you have to do it all at one shot, because it doesn't make economic sense to do 1 set of pipes, put ceiling back together, come back the next summer, do another set of pipes, and delay it that way. Now, could you do the pumps and the domestic hot water heaters secondary afterwards? Absolutely. So you can do one at one stage and one part of it at second stage, absolutely. That would be the phasing that I would see.
I have a question. How is the intermediate heated and cooled?
Intermediate school is heated with cast iron boilers, hot
So
water.
This affects the heating and
No,
temperature?
this
It
is
doesn't
just
affect
a
the temperature?
domestic this is just a domestic water.
Oh, okay.
Yep. The heating water is excellent. The boilers are in good shape. We did have a study done to replace one of the cast iron boilers with 2 high efficiency gas boilers, but the payback to do that was almost 18 years. So that's not a good use of funds. Cast iron boilers have been around for 100 years. The ones there are in excellent shape. They're running about 84% efficient. We do a combustion efficiency test on them every fall before we fire them up after we clean them. They're running 84% efficient for a boiler that is 20 years old now, going on 15 years old, 2007. That's still pretty good. So that, to me, it's not a good return on investment to tear a cast iron boiler out that's only 15 years old. Now, if it was 50 years old, different story, but they're only 15 years old. They're in good shape. They'll hold up forever. As long as we keep the water treatment up on the closed loop part of the system, those boilers should last another 20, 25 years.
I have to leave.
So I have a couple questions for Chris and Christy. Help me understand the financing options here a little bit better. This is the first time I'm hearing about, like, if it's under 10 million, then we can do bank financing rather than bond. So I know we don't know exact interest rates because, of course, we have to go to the markets and find out, but help me understand sort of what the implications are of bond financing versus bank interest financing.
It really comes down to, when you look at these projects, like where can we get the best interest rate and the lowest cost to borrow? Because I believe bond financing can be a little bit more costly when borrowing, because they have to do a different like layer of like credit checks and those type of things when you do a bond financing. So if the interest rates for a bank loan are better than bond financing, it's obviously better to go with the bank loan, one, because the interest rates are lower and the cost of finance is lower than going through the bond market.
Okay.
And so, I don't know if you remember, but when PFM did a presentation to the board back in January, it's recommended when you do a project of large size, say of 50 million, you can't borrow that all at one time anyway, because there are IRS borrowing laws that you have to meet. So we wouldn't be able to get through all the projects and have the money spent to meet the IRS regulations. So I can run through them really quickly. So what the IRS laws say is, in order to spend money, when you borrow money, you have to spend 85% of the proceeds within 3 years. There's also what they call the time test. So you must incur within 6 months a substantial binding obligation to expend at least 5% of the proceeds. And then there's the due diligence test that you have to proceed with due diligence that the capital project, and you're going to expend the funds for this capital project, so you can't walk away from it. So because we couldn't take on $50 million worth of projects at one time, we would want to borrow money in phases anyway. And so PFM recommends, when you can, to keep it under that $10 million borrowing in the phases, in the different phases.
Gotcha. So just some hypotheticals here so I can understand the situation. Well, first of all, a question. So the length of the loan wouldn't necessarily be any different than the length of payoff for the bond, right?
That is correct.
And we're talking 30 years? Is that what, 20 years, 30? What are we?
I think it was 20 that they proposed.
Yeah, generally, it's 20 years.
Okay. Then, So hypothetically, we could chunk this into multiple less than $10 million projects and get bank financing for each portion,
Correct.
hypothetically?
Yes.
And so this $10 million magic number, is this an IRS rule about? Is that a nod? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Yeah,
correct.
So they don't care if we get two $9 million loans, if they do care if we get one $18 million loan?
That is correct. Like, you can't go over the 10 million mark, or you're going out and you're gonna do a bond financing versus a bank loan. But yes, you can, I mean, you can't take a bank loan out at the same time. You have to stretch them out. But like, just as a fact to reiterate, now this was just a very quick proposal. It may not match our timeline of when we need to do things, but like a $50 million project, just as again, a high level look at how we could borrow money. They had laid out borrowing $9.6 million in July of 2021, and then borrowing about $9.9 million in May of 2022, $20 million, which would be a bond in May of 2023, and then 9.9 in January of 2024. So they can be like 6 months apart and be a bank loan. I don't believe you could take a bank loan out in the same month though at 10 million each, or just under 10 million each.
Okay, so you're saying every 6 months or longer?
Right.
It's restrictions on bond loans, right? Buying the bonds and pay back and stuff when they mature.
I wouldn't,
Yes, but bonds typically have a period of time before they're callable, or can be repaid, yes.
I mean, it's hard to project what the future is, but as you all know, we've had bonds where we sort of bundle them and repackage them, and you refinance them when they're sort of a lower interest rate. Now, interest rates are pretty low right now, so I wouldn't count on that happening as we, look forward 10 years from now, but that does happen.
Right,
What I really think this comes down to is based on, all the discussion that took place earlier this year at the Career Center, is that if you need more than 10 at a time, then you're kind of stuck with a bond and a little higher cost. And if you need less than 10 at a time, then currently, what we're seeing is that the bank loan would have a lower interest and lower cost.
Well, and another thing we got to look at is this feasibility study is going to stretch out 5 to 8 years. So you don't want to go borrow, like Christy said, all your money at one time and then have to use it by an X amount of date. This thing's going to stretch out. I think the time frame was approximately 8 years, correct, Dr. Suppo? I think that's what we had talked about.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at all the projects, and of course, a lot depends on, the board's interest in moving forward with certain projects, but to meet all of the needs, it certainly takes time. I mean, even as we look at these 3 projects, and again, between making that determination, design, concept, bidding, permits, you're looking at, probably 18 to 20 months at least.
Is the ESSER money a reimbursement situation, or do we tell them that we have something and they give us money?
It's a reimbursement.
So we would pay out of fund balance, I guess, and then we get reimbursed. Is that sort of how it works? Or just,
I would assume that
or just our cash account or whatever, right?
Right.
Just, yeah,
We'd have to pay it from somewhere and then
right.
get that money
And it
back.
just comes, yeah, okay, never mind.
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't send us a check. I wish it worked that way, but Krista tells me no.
Sometimes it works.
The other thing too that I wanted to point out before I forget is as we talk about these projects specifically and the importance of them, is when we look at our class sizes, as the board is aware, the number of kids that we have in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and the number of teams that we have, and each team, of course, has 4 core teachers. And so at the 6th grade level, we have 3 teams, So that means you have 12 core teachers. And at the 8th grade level, we have 3 teams. And again, that would be 12 teachers. So effectively, you can take the class size and divide that by 12, and that kind of gives you a pretty good idea about the number of students that are in a particular class. We know this year, with the enrollment of the 7th grade, which is at 252, which is actually a little bit less than the 8th grade, but at 252, with those 2 teams, which means 8 teachers, that gives us high class numbers, which we don't really like. And we've talked about a couple of ways of addressing that. One certainly is some temporary structures or temporary classrooms. I'm sure we've all seen those, trailer units. I know districts have used them. That's certainly something we've considered, and we wanted to bring that up as an option tonight as we talk about the feasibility study, and again, specifically the middle school. But what I did also want to bring up was, if you look at our current 5th graders, that's actually a high enrollment in our 5th grade. We currently have 277 students. So when they move into 6th grade next year, in the 22-23 school year, you would take that 277, divide it by 12, and that gives you an idea where your class size is at, which actually is very good. And we want a lower class size, particularly at that 6th grade level, because that allows those teachers in that transition year, when you have students who are moving from the intermediate building, from an elementary setting to a middle school setting, that allows, I think, greater attention by the classroom teacher and more individualized instruction. So we'll be in good shape. The problem is when your current 6th grade moves into 7th grade next year, 6th grade is at 240. So that's right now, assuming that all things stayed exactly the same, you're looking at an average of around 30 students per class. So I guess what I'm getting to, my point is, and this is a decision for the board, but I want to throw it out there. If you do nothing between now and next year, when I say nothing, we don't look at temporary classrooms, assuming enrollment stays somewhat the same, those students who are currently in 6th grade, when they're in 7th grade, the class sizes are going to be high. They're not going to be what we want, yes. They're also not going to be, they wouldn't be worse than what we currently have. Assuming that these projects are started, when those students that are currently in 5th grade, that higher class size of 277, think about it. Next year, they're in 6th grade, 22, 23. The following year, they're in 7th grade, 23, 24. That's the year that we have a problem, a big problem, because that class size is 277. So if we look at a project timeline, that would complete those new classroom additions to the middle school in time for that current 5th grade class when they became 7th graders. So I just wanted to point that out as another thing to discuss here this evening. And Joe has a little bit more information on temporary classrooms.
Yeah, I did some research for temporary classrooms, and I have 6, 8, and 10 room modular classrooms, and the 10 room classroom for setup, delivery, and dismantle and return is a little over $300,000, plus a $10,000 a month rental fee. And that does not include supplying utilities to them, which I have estimated. I'm sorry. I've done some research on temporary classrooms, and I got 10, 8, and 6 room modular classrooms. And to have a 10 classroom facility delivered, set up, and returned is a little over $310,000. And the lease rate for 24 months is $10,500 per month. Lease rate for 36 months is $9,300. And that does not include any utility hookups for water, sewer, fire alarm. I estimated those costs to be somewhere around $250,000. So you're gonna be $750,000 for the first year for a 10 modular classroom building.
So, can I then, so are we saying then that we could either do the temporary classrooms or build the permanent classrooms? Is it an either or thing, or do we need to do both?
No, it's just options that we have looked at. I'm not gonna speak for Dr. Suppo.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it's an either or. My intent was simply to throw out there that we can get modular classrooms as we look to next year. If we didn't, and we just left things the way they were, it's going to be equivalent to what we have this year, somewhat. The following year is where I really have a concern. So that's where I'm saying, hey, we can't wait. When we look to adding additional classrooms at the middle school, because that gives us, I mean, there's sufficient time now to initiate that project, go through the process, completing that project. They would be ready for that 23-24 school year, but the modular classrooms are very expensive, and so it's a matter of where do we want to put our money. I have to be honest with you, I get a sick feeling in my stomach talking about some of these numbers that Joe has, and I didn't realize that was just a 10 classroom unit. But knowing all of the projects that we have to complete, again, it's a decision for the board, and my thought is it's kind of like throwing good money after bad. But that's your decision as a board, and we want to present it to you.
So let's talk about timelines then. So, I mean, earlier I just sort of offhandedly said, best case scenario, we would start, this summer perhaps. So I guess first of all, like, is that realistic? Like, let's say that we, were to approve this in, say, November or something, like, to go out and seek financing and try to begin, like, the project that you have outlined for the middle school. Is it realistic to believe that we could begin construction in the summer and then have it done within a year or a little over a year, I guess, before the following school year?
I believe when we talk about those timelines, they not only include construction, but also the design and permitting process and bidding process. And so when you combine those, I mean, they're almost as long as construction, really.
Right.
When we talked to Site Logic, they felt like if we moved forward in a relatively soon or recent, then yes, we could have those classrooms. They could be occupied by the time the current fifth graders enter as seventh graders that fall.
So summer of 23, I suppose, is what you're saying, that we could conceivably have these projects that we've listed here as part of this $14 million package. We could potentially have that done by the summer of 23.
Correct, Joe? That's what
Right.
he indicated. Now, he did, what his thought was, and actually this surprised me somewhat, was that he would begin with the parent loop because he felt that could be started sooner than the actual construction projects of the new classroom and the addition to the cafeteria. My concern was, well, would you really want to do that when you're going to have construction that takes place on that end of the building? And I'm not a contractor or a construction manager. He had several good answers to that, which included there's plenty of space there. When it comes to the drive itself and paving it, we would use a rough course pave, not put the finished course on, wait till all the construction was done, then put the finished course on.
And then put your slip forms on.
I take that, I interpret that as, I watched them pave King Street, and they paved it twice. And so I think what he said was they'd pave it once, and then before they paved it the second time, all the construction would be done on that end of the building.
Correct.
So
That's right.
he felt that there was a way to phase that in to be able to have those done. But certainly, he did seem to think that the parent loop would be something that would be started sooner than the building construction.
Dr. Seppo, can you walk us back through and just to help to clarify, we had discussion and committed additional resources in terms of teachers and so forth to the middle school effort. I think that maybe really equates almost to fixing part of a problem, and that this space addressing these 8 classrooms and so forth is really the critical component that goes with that first piece that I mentioned for that whole plan to make sense. Can you just touch on that a minute, please?
Yeah, and I'll just cut back through that and explain some of them. But when you look at the middle school, the way it's currently configured, again, the number of classrooms that we have, or the number of core teachers and teams that are designated for each grade level is a little bit different. Currently, we have 3 teams at the 6th grade and 3 teams at the 8th grade. What that means is that at the 7th grade, you only have 2 teams. And there are 4 core teachers per team. So at the middle school in 7th grade, 2 times 4 means you have 8 teachers to divide your students among. As opposed to in 6th grade and 8th grade, you have 12 teachers to divide those students among. So what does that mean? That means in 7th grade, you end up with higher class sizes. Not something we prefer, but that's what you have. The classes themselves, we have, the truth of the matter is, if the board said today, okay, Dr. Suppo, we authorize you to add a 3rd team to the 7th grade. I couldn't do it. And the reason I couldn't do it is because they're literally, I would need to have 4 classrooms to be able to do that. And those 4 classrooms.
But it's kind of where we're going.
Right, exactly. Those 4 classrooms don't exist. Now you might say, well, what's happening? I mean, yeah, we have bumps in our enrollment, and we'll have a grade level that goes high, and then we'll have a couple that go low, and that's sort of the cycle of how it's been for a number of years. True. But we've also added, and there are many more supports that are in a school building today than there have been in the past. As an example, at the middle school this year, we began the STAR program. We began the autistic support classroom. We have additional support teachers that we've integrated as part of the middle school. And so every time you do that, you know, there's a little space here and a little there. And they may not even be full-size classrooms, but what it adds up to is between full-size classrooms in those support classrooms, it adds up to a situation where you literally have no room. I think it's the right thing to do. We need to add those supports, continue adding those supports in our school, and particularly in our middle school. But when you simply add a teacher, you have to think about that. That means we're also adding a classroom where there's a space that needs to be occupied by someone. In addition, we have outside agencies that come into the building. Those outside agencies, we have school-based counseling that happens. We have physical therapy that happens. CYS, Shippensburg University Social Skills Group, speech, gifted. So, again, this isn't something that's happened over the last 12 months, but over a number of years. When you add additional supports, that certainly takes some space. So between the addition of teachers for providing those supports and the additional supports that we have for our students, that's where we need more classrooms.
Thank you.
So this is on the discussion agenda for this meeting. Is there any reason why we couldn't put it on the action agenda at our board meeting next week and approve this and start the ball rolling?
So
I'm channeling Fred Scott right now. That's what
I appreciate that, Dr. Lyman. So really the next step for this would be to get a proposal from K&W, would be doing the site engineer work. And the board would then approve or disapprove that proposal. We would also want to receive a proposal from EI Architects, who has been working with us as part of the feasibility study to do the concept, I hate to say design work, but the rough concept of some of these projects. And then, of course, we would want a proposal also from SiteLogic, who would act as the construction manager. So next steps would be solicit and get those 3 proposals from those 3 entities, having the board approve those if they so desire, and also at the same time correspondingly have bond counsel come back in now that we're, if we're serious, and make a motion at some point to move forward with bond counsel.
Yeah, so I have a kid that would be in that 7th grade classroom, so I have a vested interest in making this happen. So I think we should do exactly what you just said as quickly as possible.
I agree. And I would just, I just want to go back to the intermediate school, hopefully as a part of this, the point was made that we can do that component much cheaper. And in particular, if you look at it and you talk to the vendor and look at the timing, and if there's a way to adjust the payment of monies so that they fall into 2 different years, some kind of down payment thing and progress payments, such that, and then final payment, such that the money's divided somewhat equally into 2 years, we can probably stomach that.
I agree.
And I know that, I hate to say this because I certainly can't control that this would happen, but I'll bring it up. I mean, when we look at these projects, we're looking at very high-level estimates based on the expertise of, the SiteLogic and engineers that we've been working with. But that's not to say that something, who knows, we might be able to save money along the way that also would pay for at least part of or some of those additional projects.
If I could just add something to that too. I mean, I am also not a project manager or construction person, but as I look through these, and you talked about, economies of scale earlier. I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, one of the projects that we have for the middle school is the sprinklers, but then I think that there's also sprinklers at the high school that need replacing. So I don't know, but it seems like doing those both at the same time, and those both sound like they're pretty high priority projects.
There are no sprinkler systems at the middle school or the high school. There does not need to be until you go over a certain square footage of building additions, which we don't know yet whether we will hit at the middle school or the high school. There are ways around it, and we spoke about that today. Not maybe around it, but a better solution with fire doors and fire dampers and those kind of things, so we can isolate the new construction from the old construction. But that is a real possibility that we're going to have to sprinkle both the middle school and the high school.
So I'm seeing a $1.8 million on the for the middle school project for fully sprinkler. Was that not part of the $14 million that we're looking at?
At this time, no, because they'll need to get with our inspectors and see what current local code is on that. If we can use fire doors for the new construction section and fireproof materials, we should be okay. If we cannot, then we'll have to end up putting sprinkler system in the entire building. So it is, that 1.8 is a possibility, correct?
Joe, we'll have to double check that, because from what I'm seeing here, that is included as part of that number right now, as sort of a, hey, if we have to do it, they wouldn't want to come back to us and say, it's going to be an additional $1.8 million. So I thought that number was tucked in there, but we will clarify that. The hope is that we can do some alternatives. And again, that will come out as part of the design process and permitting process, whether there's a way to save some money there. But
Right,
it-
yeah, so my comment wasn't about sprinklers, my comment was about like, you know, when we're talking, you're asking for, you know, project bids from these companies, I guess I would just, in my opinion, I would say, give them the flexibility to make recommendations that they think take advantage of economies of scale that would save us money if there are projects at our other buildings that would make sense to couple with these projects. And it may be that we decide, just based on a list of priorities, that we don't want to pursue those projects. I just don't want to hamstring the folks that are giving us bids by excluding the work that could potentially be done at the other buildings as well.
Yeah, what we talked about is picking out projects that may make sense at that time, but maybe aren't part of that list, and adding those in as alternative bid projects. So the construction company, when they bid it, they would bid on those items as alternates. So there would be sort of a menu that we would, as a district, be able to select from.
Interesting, okay.
And I would just like to say this too, just to sort of round out the temporary classroom discussion. That question really came up as if space is critical, or as we look at the timing of the projects, is there a way to relieve some of the stress as it relates to space in looking at, you know, temporary classrooms? But with the answer like we got, first of all, I think most of our needs wouldn't be as small as 10, and then further, they look, unless they would be absolutely essential, they look kind of cost prohibitive to me, because I would really hate to spend this kind of money on some temporary fix when we see the overall long-term 20-year look at the district. It goes beyond, you know, our entire borrowing capacity. We'll need those $500,000 chunks along the way to fill in the pieces for the things that we're going to keep for the next 20 or 30 years, and as opposed to giving it to some rental company, if at all possible. Thank you.
And Mr. Burt, I agree wholeheartedly. I would say the caveat to that would be, if the board were not interested in moving forward in an aggressive manner with regard to the classroom additions, I would say, unfortunately, it is something we would have to consider. Assuming, hopeful that the board is favorable to those classroom additions and moving forward here in the very near future, then it does seem very cost prohibitive. It seems a shame to spend that kind of money. Again, you know, assuming class sizes stay about where they're at, it's not going to be any worse than what we're doing right now. Again, I'm not saying that's great with the student-teacher ratio, but we can live through it. And that money would be well spent in other places.
Which is to say that if we will move forward with what we have lined out in front of us for all the reasons we've discussed, we can hopefully avoid the temporary classroom route and the high cost and having nothing to show for it in the end.
Yeah, so, again, channeling Fred Scott, let's do this. I think, let's make it happen.
We don't need official action from the board, but if I could just look down the row here and see, is there agreement for us to solicit formal proposals from those three entities at this point? Okay.
Yes.
So the administration will seek formal proposals from SiteLogic as a construction manager, from K&W as engineer and site work, and EI Associates for architectural work. and also we'll work with Mrs. Lenz in the business department, and we'll get the council back in here to talk more detail about borrowing and specifically a just under $10 million borrow or finance for those projects.
Dr. Suppo, just one more thing that perhaps might just help fully round out the discussion, and that would be just a brief discussion about the recent events that have taken place that caused debt retirement and so forth, that really put us in a position. In other words, now's the time. How did, just a couple of minutes that relate to debt service, retirement of debt, and how did we get in this position? Obviously, I think it goes without saying that it was based on good fiscal management on the part of previous boards. But some recent events occurred with debt retirement that allow us at this unique particular period of time to be able to, to do this. Would you elaborate? Thank you.
Yeah, I will, and I will tell you, in my experience in other districts, quite frankly, Shippensburg is in a really good place when it comes to debt service. And so there has been some good decisions that have been made with regard to our money and financing and budgeting in past years. And I say that because the district is in a place where the debt that they've incurred for projects that were done numerous years ago has been paid down without incurring new debt. And so what that does is that releases that amount, or will release that amount almost in its entirety, to be able to dedicate to larger projects and things that we need to have happen here in the school district. So I think smart fiscal management, good budgeting. I'll give kudos to our business manager for watching what we spend and how we spend it. And through that process and decisions that the board has made, the district will be in a position where we're able to take on new debt without having to affect that specific line item in the budget or increase that line item in the budget, which in turn is good for taxpayers. We know that the plan comp process, which had previously existed for a number of years in Pennsylvania, the members of our audience who are not familiar with that, that was a process where if a school district wanted to undergo a significant project, they would apply to the state for some type of reimbursement, or it wouldn't be dollar for dollar, but for reimbursement through the state. PlanCon has gone away. I believe it's probably about 10 years ago now. And so that reimbursement doesn't exist. So for school districts to incur new debt or take on new projects, it's very difficult. And so for that reason, because PlanCon is not an option, there isn't that state reimbursement. Really, only districts that are in a good financial place are able to do so. And so, I'm happy that Shippensburg is where it is. We know that there are a number of projects that need to be taken care of, that buildings need that continual maintenance and upgrade. But I think this is a great first step in being able to do that without having it affect the taxpayer, because we're able to do that within the debt service that we already have as a school district.
I just want to pause and say thank you for the credit, but I also have to give credit to previous administration, previous business administrator, previous superintendent, previous boards. I can't take all the credit for it. So they actually had put us in a good financial place to be able to pay down debt in order to reborrow and keep our debt service payments level.
Anything else from the board?
Jim, you're quiet. Do you have anything? Good to have you back.
It's good to have you back, Jim.
Yes, we're very happy to have you back, Mr. Vard. Well, that concludes, Mr. Vice President, that concludes the discussion part of the agenda. At this point, we can move on to citizen comments regarding any non-agenda items.
Rebecca Kessler? Corey Stevens? No? Beth?
We can't hear you.
Great. Thank you. We're very happy he's back. Did you hear that, Jim?
No.
Everybody's happy that you're back.
Board comments. Michael? Board comment.
Just since we talked about the drop-off process now, I just wanted to give a public shout out. I believe it's Mr. Mancino that manages the crosswalk as you're dropping off kids. I'm so happy he's there every morning. He deserves some public credit for helping manage that process. So I know parent drop-off is always kind of a challenge, but it's good to have our teachers. And I'm sure Mr. Mancino's not the only one, but I'm happy for all those teachers that volunteer every morning to make that a little more manageable.
Thank you.
Mr. Burke?
I'm good tonight, Mr. Suiters. Thank you.
Dr. Goode?
No comments, thanks.
My only comment is I'd just like to thank the administration for such a clear presentation on the information tonight. And I'd like to just thank all the other board members for their comments because they really, I think, did a really nice job in highlighting the needs at the middle school and the methods for attaining the improvements. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to give some credit. The man that's no longer with us was a mentor to me. Mr. Catholic. He was very instrumental in the financial situation that we were in. And I'm going to miss him. That's it.
I unfortunately was not in the school district when Mr. Cassidy served, but he certainly has left a legacy, one that I've heard of from day one that I was here in the school district, his contributions to the board, the community, the school district, and I know he certainly meant a lot to members that are currently on this board and the mentorship that he provided. So, certainly our hearts and prayers are with him and his family. We hope we, as board members and as school district, can keep his memory alive. So thank you, Mr. Suiters.
Motion adjourned.
Dwayne Burt, move to adjourn.
Second. Adjourned.